She thought she ruled the neighborhood with her clipboard and fines, until I brought the one document that made her entire HOA vanish. The morning began like any other in my quiet mountain valley, mist rolling low across the pine-covered slopes, the air cool and sharp enough to wake you better than coffee. The only sound was the creak that cut behind my cabin, and the rhythmic creak of the porch swing as I sat with my mug, watching the sunlight begin to spill over the ridge. For 15 years, this land had been my escape from everything I once called normal corporate noise, HOA meetings, pointless arguments about mailbox colors and lawn heights. I had bought this cabin because it wasn't part of any association. My property line was a clean break, half a mile past the edge of Ridgewood Estates. No rules, no board, no community guidelines. At least that's what I thought. When I stepped down from the porch that morning, I saw it, an envelope taped to my front door, white, crisp, and official-looking, the kind that already carries the smell of trouble before you even open it. The top corner bore a printed logo, RIDGWOODESTATES HOMOWNERS Association. My stomach tightened. I didn't live in Ridgewood Estates. I didn't owe them anything. I peeled the letter off the wood and turned it over. My name was printed in block capitals, mark HOLLOWAY. No stamp, no envelope seal. Someone had walked right up to my door. I unfolded it slowly, the paper already creased from being jammed under the tape. Notice of violation and noncompliance. Dear Mr. Holloway, it has come to our attention that your property, specifically your visible perimeter fencing, exterior paint, and unapproved driveway extension, violates Ridgewood Estates community standards as established in the 2018 amended bylaws. You are hereby ordered to submit an application for compliance review within 10 days, or face legal action for property code violations and unregistered membership noncompliance. We expect your cooperation to maintain the community's aesthetic integrity. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore, President, Ridgewood Estates HOA. The words blurred for a second as I read them again. Unregistered membership, legal action. The absurdity made me laugh, an irritated, disbelieving sound that echoed across my porch. Karen Whitmore, of course. I'd heard about her. Everyone in the valley had. The self-appointed queen of Ridgewood, known for her power trips and clipboard patrols. People joked she measured grass with a ruler. But this wasn't a joke. I went inside and pulled open the drawer where I kept my land deeds. The paper still smelled faintly of the county clerk's office from all those years ago. I unfolded the map, tracing the boundary lines with my finger. There it was in black and white. Parcel 217A, Holloway, M. The border stopped exactly 0.6 miles south of Ridgewood Estates. I lived beyond the HOA boundary, outside their reach. So why was Karen threatening me with compliance notices like I was one of her subjects? I took a sip of my coffee, now cold, and stared at the paper again. The legal jargon, the smug tone, it wasn't just overreach. It was intimidation. She was testing me, probably trying to expand the HOA's jurisdiction, one frightened homeowner at a time. I'd seen it before, years ago when my father fought a similar battle in another county. Back then, they tried to annex private farmland into a rural development zone. He had fought back, with records, maps, and the one thing bureaucrats hate most: proof. The memory made me smile grimly. Maybe history had a sense of humor. Outside, the sound of an SUV engine drifted up the road. I looked out the window just in time to see a shiny white Range Rover crawling past, windows tinted, the Ridgewood Estates logo magnetized on the side. The driver slowed, turned her head, and I caught a glimpse of blonde hair pulled tight into a bun. Karen. Even from here, I could feel her stare like a hawk surveying prey. She raised her phone, snapping what looked like a photo of my fence before driving off. That was it. I set the letter down on the table and exhaled through my teeth. The message wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration of war. By mid-morning, I was packing my cabin. My phone buzzed with a call from my neighbor, Bert, a retired surveyor who'd lived in the valley since before Ridgewood Estates even existed. "You got one of those letters too?" he asked, his gravelly voice laced with irritation. "Yeah," I said, "just found it taped to my door." He snorted. "Corinne's been on a power trip, trying to claim the whole valley's part of Ridgewood now. She's even been pestering the county office about redrawing district lines. Thought you should know." Redrawing boundaries, that explained it. Corinne wasn't satisfied ruling her half-acre plots. She wanted control of the entire valley. My land, Bert's land, even the creek. "She can't do that," I said, anger rising. "This property was deeded before Ridgewood existed. It's county jurisdiction, not HOA. "Tell her that," Bert replied. "She won't listen to me. Last week she fined my cousin for having a shed she couldn't even see from the street." That made me laugh again, but it was hollow this time. "Let her try," I muttered. "If she wants a fight, she'll get one." After hanging up, I grabbed my phone and started documenting everything. The letter, the date, the Range Rover's license plate, even the property markers along my fence line. I wasn't going to let her twist anything. By noon, I scanned my deed, property plat, and every old document I had. But one detail kept nagging at me, the letter's wording about 2018 amended bylaws. I'd never seen those, but I suspected they might hold the key to her overreach. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove straight into Ridgewood Estates. The neighborhood looked like it had been ripped from a luxury magazine. Identical stone facades, trimmed lawns, and mailboxes painted the same dull beige. Every driveway had the same brand of SUV. And in the middle of it all stood the HOA office, tucked inside what used to be the community clubhouse. A large sign outside read, RIDGWOD ESTATES HOMOWNERS Association. Private property, members only. I parked anyway. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and control. A receptionist looked up from behind a granite counter, startled. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. "Yes," I said, holding up the letter. "I need to speak to Corinne Whitmore." Her expression flickered. "Do you live in Ridgewood Estates?" "Not exactly," I said evenly, "but she seems to think I do." Before the receptionist could reply, the office door opened, and there she was, Corinne herself. Perfect posture, tailored blazer, and that practiced smile people wear when they think they already own the room. "Mr. Holloway," she said, stepping forward, "I was wondering when you'd come by." I frowned. "You know who I am." "Of course," she said sweetly. "We've had several complaints about your property. Non-conforming fencing, unsightly gravel driveway, and shall we say, aesthetic inconsistency." "You mean I don't live under your rules?" I said flatly. "Because I'm not in your HOA." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "Boundaries can change, Mr. Holloway. The community is growing. The association has voted to extend its coverage to include the surrounding valley properties for the sake of uniformity." I raised an eyebrow. "You can't just vote to take my land." "Oh, I think you'll find it's more nuanced than that," she said smoothly. "The county has been reviewing Ridgewood's development plan. You might want to start cooperating before things become complicated." She let the last word linger in the air like a threat. I took a step closer, meeting her gaze. "You taped an illegal notice to my door and threatened me with legal action. That's what's complicated. I suggest you check your jurisdiction before sending another piece of paper my way." For a moment her smile faltered. "We'll see about that," she said finally. I left before she could say more, but I caught the receptionist whispering something into her phone as I walked out. The drive back home felt longer than usual. Clouds gathered over the valley, casting long shadows across the road. When I reached my cabin, I stopped at the mailbox, and there it was again. Another envelope. This one wasn't taped to my door. It was inside my mailbox, which meant someone had opened it illegally. I tore it open, expecting another threat. Instead, it contained only a single line typed in bold. This is your final warning. Remove your fence or face immediate penalties. No signature this time, just the HOA logo. That night, as rain began to fall against the windows, I sat by the fireplace, the letter burning in my hand. This wasn't just about fences or property lines anymore. This was about power, and Corinne had just declared war on the wrong man. Because what she didn't know yet, what I was about to remind her of, was that the valley she wanted to control didn't just belong to me. It was mine, down to the last inch of soil, rock, and water beneath her precious community. And soon she'd find out exactly what that meant. The next morning the rain had cleared, but the air carried that raw, heavy stillness that comes after a storm, a silence too deliberate, like the valley itself was holding its breath. I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the cabin, every passing car down on the county road made my mind circle back to the letters taped to my door. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Corinne had crossed a line, literally, and if she thought she could intimidate me into submission with bureaucratic nonsense, she'd picked the wrong man to mess with. I'd spent years in corporate negotiations, dissecting contracts for loopholes and inconsistencies. HOA threats were amateur work compared to that. After a quick breakfast, I packed my old leather folder, the one that still held my original property documents, and headed down the mountain toward the Lincoln County Records office. The drive took 40 minutes, winding through pine-shaded roads and the occasional stretch of open farmland. The road signs grew older and more worn the closer I got to town. By the time I reached the courthouse square, I'd already rehearsed what I needed to say half a dozen times. Inside, the building smelled faintly of old paper and lemon disinfectant. A ceiling fan clicked overhead, circulating air that had probably been the same since the 80s. A few people waited at the counter, talking to clerks behind thick glass. I stepped up when it was my turn. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with sharp glasses and an even sharper tone, glanced up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, setting my folder on the counter. "I'm looking for the original boundary maps for Ridgewood Estates, including any exempt parcels that weren't incorporated when the development was established." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a pretty specific request." "Yeah," I said, "I'm having a dispute with the HOA." That earned a knowing smirk. "Aren't we all?" She typed something into her system. "Give me a minute." She disappeared into a back room filled with filing cabinets that looked older than both of us. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. I glanced around, noticing a corkboard filled with public notices, property auctions, and county updates. One flyer caught my eye: proposed Ridgewood expansion, public hearing scheduled for April 14th. That was 2 weeks from now. So Corinne wasn't bluffing. She was already trying to expand Ridgewood's reach through the county. The clerk returned with a rolled-up map and a faded folder. "You'll want these," she said, laying them on the counter. "Ridgewood Estates, filed 1994, amended 2018. There's also a record of excluded parcels. Want me to pull that too?" "Yes, please." She returned with another folder, thinner but clearly older, the kind with typewritten labels fading from decades of handling. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Inside were property plat maps from before Ridgewood even existed, dated 1968, stamped with the seal of the Lincoln County Surveyor's Office. And there it was. Parcel 217A, Holloway Family Estate. In bold, underlined text at the bottom of the page were the words that made me exhale in relief. "This parcel shall remain exempt from any future annexation, incorporation, or private association governance, without the express consent of the owner or heirs." That one sentence was my shield. My father had made sure of it when he bought this land decades ago. Ridgewood had grown around us, but the Holloway property remained sovereign, legally untouchable. The clerk leaned forward, reading over my shoulder. "Well, there's your answer," she said. "They can't touch you. You're what we call a grandfathered exemption. That means even if they extend their borders, you stay independent." I smiled for the first time that morning. "So if they keep harassing me?" She shrugged. "Document everything. They're violating state code if they claim authority over you. You can file a complaint with the county inspector's office. Or," she added with a small grin, "you could just remind them who owns the dirt under their fancy driveways." I couldn't help but chuckle. Maybe I will. Before I left, I had the clerk make certified copies of every map and record. I wanted Corinne to see the proof in ink and seal. Back outside, the sun had fully risen, warming the courthouse steps. I spread the documents across the hood of my truck, the crisp paper fluttering in the light breeze. It was all there, clear as day. The Ridgewood line stopped hundreds of yards short of my property. Corinne's letters weren't just wrong, they were illegal intimidation. That realization didn't calm me, it made me angrier. Because now I understood this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a power grab. When I got home, I found another SUV parked at the end of my driveway. Not Corinne's white Range Rover this time, a black Escalade with tinted windows. My jaw clenched. As I approached, a woman stepped out. It was Corinne. Her sunglasses gleamed in the sun, and her clipboard was tucked under her arm like a weapon. "Mr. Holloway," she said smoothly, as if she hadn't just trespassed on my property. "We need to talk." "No, we don't," I said, holding up the folder of records. "The county and I already did. You have no jurisdiction here. None." Her lips tightened, but she didn't back down. "Boundaries are being reviewed. You'll be included soon enough." I held out the paper, pointing to the highlighted line. "Read this, Corinne. Exempt parcel, you can't annex it. You can't fine me. You can't even set foot on it without my permission." Her eyes flicked to the seal, reading silently. Her jaw twitched, but she kept that brittle smile. "You think this old document matters? We have newer bylaws." "Bylaws don't override county law," I said. "You're out of your depth." For a moment her mask cracked. "Mr. Holloway, your attitude isn't helping your case. The community wants uniformity. Your property is an eyesore. It devalues everything around it." I laughed, a short, cold sound. "I was here before your HOA existed. The creek, the road, the forest, all of it. Ridgewood is the intruder here, not me." Her nostrils flared. "You'll regret making this difficult." "Is that a threat?" I asked quietly. She hesitated just long enough for the silence to sting. "A promise," she said finally, turning toward her SUV. Before she got in, she added, "You can wave your papers around all you want, but the board has influence, Mr. Holloway. And influence can move mountains or men like you." She drove off, her tires spitting gravel onto the road. I stood there for a long time, staring after her. The breeze carried the faint scent of pine and rain, but beneath it, I could still smell her arrogance. That night I pinned the county map to my wall, a physical reminder of what was mine. The boundary lines, drawn in fading ink, had never looked more meaningful. But I couldn't shake a feeling that Corinne wasn't done. Her kind never accepted defeat quietly. 2 days later, I got confirmation. It started with a knock at my door around noon. When I opened it, a man in a reflective vest stood on my porch, holding a clipboard. "Afternoon, sir. County building inspection, routine survey." My stomach dropped. I didn't request any inspection. He flipped through his papers. "It says here there's been a report of unapproved construction, new fencing, and a gravel driveway extension." I felt my hands tighten at my sides. "And who filed that report?" He looked uncertain. "Anonymous source, but it came through the Ridgewood Estates HOA office." Of course it did. I motioned him inside. You can look around if you want, but this isn't Ridgewood jurisdiction. I'm on parcel 217A Holloway, county exempt. His eyes widened slightly. Oh, one of those old ones. Exactly. I showed him the certified document. He nodded, muttering something about wasted trips. Sorry about this, he said as he packed up his clipboard. Happens more often than you'd think with Ridgewood. They like to test the limits. Yeah, I said. Well, they just hit the wall. By the end of the week, Karen had escalated. Flyers appeared in mailboxes along the road claiming there was an unauthorized structure, bringing down community values. She didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who she meant. Then came the petition, Extend Ridgewood Boundaries for Unified Community Management. I saw her and her little entourage walking door to door in their pastel suits, collecting signatures. Bert called me that evening, his voice dripping with disbelief. You won't believe this, she came to my door, said she's trying to protect property values. I told her the only thing dropping around here is her common sense. I laughed, but underneath it, I felt something colder stirring. Karen wasn't just stubborn, she was strategic. She wanted control, and she'd twist the law until it fit her will. Booty if she thought she could rewrite history. She had no idea how deep my roots went in this valley. I spent the next 2 nights digging through old archives, digital and physical. My father had been meticulous, keeping ledgers, land grants, and water rights filings. Among them, I found something I hadn't noticed before, a 1973 addendum filed by the Holloway family. It wasn't just land. It was mineral and water rights. That meant the creek that supplied Ridgewood's irrigation, their manicured lawns, their fountains all flowed from my property. And I owned it. Every drop. A slow grin crept across my face. Karen wanted to play legal games. Fine, but she just picked a board where I held every piece. The next morning, I drove back to the records office to have the addendum certified. The clerk, the same woman as before, raised her eyebrows when she saw it. Well, I'll be, she said. You've got full control of the waterway, that's rare these days. I guess Karen won't like that, I said. She chuckled. I'd pay to see her face when she finds out. So would I. As I left the courthouse, I passed by the public notice board again. The flyer for the Ridgewood expansion hearing had new writing scrawled across it in pen. POSTPONED, County Reviewing Legal Objection filed by Holloway, M. I stopped staring at it for a long moment. My objection had already reached them. The process was moving. But that also meant Karen knew. Sure enough, when I got home, her Range Rover was parked right by my fence. She was standing there, arms crossed, staring at the creek that divided my land from Ridgewood's perfectly landscaped border. Admiring the view, I asked, stepping out of the truck. Her head turned slowly. The sunlight caught in her sunglasses, but her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Enjoy it while you can, Mr. Holloway. This won't last. Oh, it'll last, I said, walking closer. Because unlike your bylaws, this, I pointed to the creek, is written into county law. You mess with me again, and I'll make sure every lawyer in Lincoln County knows your HOA been operating outside its jurisdiction. She smiled tightly. You think the law protects you, but laws can change. Influence can rewrite them. Then you'd better start writing fast, I said, because I've already filed mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of rushing water filled the air, the creek, my creek, carving its steady path through the valley. Then Karen turned on her heel, climbed into her SUV, and drove off without another word. As her car disappeared around the bend, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and foreboding. I'd won this round, but I knew Karen well enough now she wouldn't back down. And as the wind rustled through the trees and the creek whispered its ancient rhythm, I realized something. This fight wasn't about fences or property lines anymore. It was about control. And if Corinne wanted a battle over the valley's boundaries, I was ready to remind her that not all lines are meant to be crossed. The next few weeks felt like living under surveillance. Every morning when I stepped outside with my coffee, I could sense eyes on me, silent, invisible, and judgmental. It wasn't paranoia. Corinne had turned Ridgewood into a full-blown suburban panopticon, and I was her number one target. It started small, as all control games do. The first letter came tucked into my mailbox, printed on crisp white HOA stationery. Notice of continued noncompliance. Mr. Holloway, despite prior warnings, your property remains in violation of Ridgewood Estates community standards. Specifically, your fence height exceeds approved dimensions, your gravel driveway lacks authorization, and your visible refuse bins detract from community aesthetics. Effective immediately, fines will accrue at $100 per day until compliance is achieved. Failure to comply may result in escalation to Ridgewood's legal committee. Corinne Whitmore, HOA President. I laughed when I read it, $100 a day for what existing? Then I noticed the day after I'd shown Corinne the county documents proving she had no authority over my land. This wasn't about rules anymore, it was about ego. I tore the notice in half and tossed it into the fire pit, but that was just the beginning. Within a week, 2 more letters arrived. One claimed I was disrupting community harmony by allowing unregistered visitors, Bert, who came over to share a beer. The next accused me of environmental negligence because leaves from my pine trees were drifting into HOA drainage zones. They were absurd, almost comical, but the relentlessness of it all was exhausting. Then came the cameras. It was a Tuesday morning when I first spotted them. I was walking down the edge of my property to check the creek flow when something glinted in the sunlight, a faint reflection from a tree near the boundary line. I climbed the slope and there it was, a small black security camera, mounted high and angled directly toward my cabin. The tag beneath it read, Property of Ridgewood Estates HOA. My jaw tightened. By that afternoon, I'd found 2 more cameras, one facing my driveway, another hidden behind a cluster of wild lilacs near the fence line. None were on my side of the property, but their lenses clearly pointed into it. I took photos of each, timestamped and geotagged. Evidence. That evening, I emailed Corinne directly. Subject: illegal surveillance. Corinne, I've documented 3 Ridgewood HOA cameras pointed directly onto my property. I remind you that my parcel is exempt from your jurisdiction, and your surveillance violates state privacy statutes. Remove them within 48 hours or I'll file a criminal complaint. Mark Holloway. Her reply arrived within the hour. Subject: community safety. Mr. Holloway, these cameras are part of a Ridgewood-wide security initiative for the protection of all nearby residents. If you are conducting activities consistent with community standards, you have nothing to fear. Corinne Whitmore. The audacity of it made me laugh out loud, then slam my fist on the table. Nothing to fear, the classic bully's line. By the next morning, whispers had started to spread through the valley. I heard them at the gas station, the post office, even from passing drivers who slowed to stare at my cabin. The guy who told the HOA to shove it. Corinne's rebel. The holdout. It should have been funny. Maybe it was in another life. But living it, knowing someone was watching your every move, had a way of eating at you. Even Bert noticed. One evening he pulled up in his old pickup, headlights off. "You seen what they're saying online?" he asked, handing me his phone. On the Ridgewood Estates neighborhood app, a post titled "Disturbing Neighbor Behavior" had racked up over 100 comments. Some of you may have noticed a man living near the South Ridge who refuses to cooperate with Ridgewood standards. He's been seen filming board members, harassing HOA staff, and making threats. Karen WHOA president. The comment section was worse. Typical backwoods type. He's probably hiding something. I heard he's illegally using our water. My fists clenched as I scrolled. It wasn't just defamation, it was strategy. Karen wasn't trying to find me anymore. She was trying to isolate me. Make me the villain so no one questioned her. I shut off the phone. She's playing dirty, I muttered. Bert spat into the dirt. Always has, but don't let her corner you. You got proof. You got law. That's more than she's got. He was right, but it didn't make the nights easier. I started noticing new SUVs idling near my driveway, their engines humming quietly, headlights off. Once, I caught a man pretending to jog with a bodycam clipped to his vest. Another time, I spotted a teenage kid flying a drone just above tree level, hovering over my roof before darting back toward Ridgewood. I could have called the sheriff, but I knew how this worked. Small-town politics. Karen's husband was on the Ridgewood Planning Committee. Her brother-in-law worked with the county zoning office. Complaints had a way of vanishing when her name was involved. So I decided to play her game, but better. I bought my own cameras, 4 of them, mounted at perfect angles along my property's perimeter, 2 visible, 2 hidden. I wired them into a private feed that streamed directly to a local storage server. Every Range Rover, every drone, every fake inspector would be recorded. I didn't just want proof, I wanted leverage. And it didn't take long to get some. 2 nights later, one of my cameras caught footage of a woman in a blazer and gloves sneaking up to my fence with a flashlight. She stapled something to one of the posts before hurrying back to her SUV. When I checked in the morning, it was a bright yellow paper. Final notice of violation. Failure to comply will result in civil action. Ridgewood Legal Committee reserves the right to pursue damages, legal fees, and property liens. A lien on property she didn't even govern. That was it. I wasn't going to let this slide another day. I drove to the county office again. This time, directly to Inspector Ralston, a stocky man with a graying mustache and an expression like he'd seen every kind of nonsense this county could produce. He leaned back in his chair as I laid the stack of letters, maps, and photos on his desk. "You're telling me the HOA president has cameras pointed at your house and is issuing fines outside her district?" "Yes," I said, my tone calm but clipped, "and she's doing it in writing." He rubbed his chin. "You've got yourself a solid case here, Mr. Holloway. This is harassment and possibly criminal surveillance. Let me talk to legal counsel before we move forward." "Do it," I said, "because if she crosses that creek one more time, I'll have her cited myself." He nodded. "We'll handle it." That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of peace. I poured myself a drink and sat on the porch, listening to the hum of crickets beneath the dark sky. Then, from across the valley, a light blinked on, bright and deliberate. A floodlight, mounted somewhere on the edge of Ridgewood, angled directly toward my cabin. Within seconds, another joined it. Then another. 3 blinding white beams cutting through the night, all aimed like spotlights on a stage. I shielded my eyes, staring at the ridiculous display. Karen had turned her entire neighborhood into a stage for her obsession. "All right, Karen," I muttered. "You want a show, you'll get one." I went inside, powered up my laptop, and uploaded all the footage from my cameras. The midnight visits, the drone passes, even Karen stapling that notice in the dark. Then I created a folder titled Ridgewood HOA Harassment Evidence and copied it to 3 different drives. One for me, one for Bert, one for the county. Just in case she tried something desperate. The following morning, I found something new waiting at the end of my driveway. A bright orange traffic cone and a laminated sign that read, "Private Road, RIDGWOD, ESTATES access only." I stared at it, barely containing a laugh. She'd actually tried to claim my driveway now. A truck slowed on the road as it passed. The driver, a middle-aged man I didn't recognize, rolled down his window. "Hey, you the guy fighting the HOA?" "Depends who's asking." He grinned. "You're a legend, man. Half the folks in Ridgewood wish they had your guts. Corinne's been running that place like a cult." He drove off before I could answer, but I couldn't help smiling. Maybe, just maybe, the tide was starting to turn. Because for every whisper Corinne spread, another whisper grew louder. The story of the man who refused to kneel to her HOA throne. And though she'd plastered my name across her little empire like a warning label, something told me her power was starting to crack. But I knew one thing for certain. When tyrants lose control, they don't surrender. They lash out. And from the way those floodlights burned through the night, I could tell Corinne was preparing for something big. She wasn't done watching me. But that was fine. Because I was watching her too. The night of the HOA board meeting felt like the build-up to a trial. Mark parked his truck on the edge of the cul-de-sac, far enough away to avoid the cluster of SUVs and sedans lining the street. Through the large bay window of the community clubhouse, warm light spilled out, illuminating a room full of folding chairs, a projector screen, and a long oak table where the board sat like magistrates. The scent of coffee and paper wafted out the door every time someone entered or exited. Mark tightened his jacket and checked the documents tucked into his leather folder, copies of his deed, county parcel maps, and a printout of the original subdivision agreement. He'd been preparing for this all week. Tonight, he would finally put an end to the letters, fines, and threats. Inside, murmurs rose as neighbors filled the rows of chairs. Some gave Mark curious glances, others whispered behind their hands. A few offered him quick nods of support, quiet but visible rebellion against Corinne's reign. At the front of the room, the HOA board sat like a tribunal, and at the center of it all was Corinne herself. Corinne wore a bright crimson blazer that matched the sharpness of her lipstick. Her hair was sculpted into a tight blonde helmet, and in her hands she held a stack of papers like a judge ready to issue a sentence. Her expression was practiced sweetness, but the tightness around her eyes betrayed irritation. "Well," Corinne said into the microphone as Mark walked in, "if it is Mr. Wilson, the gentleman who believes the rules don't apply to him, welcome." A few people chuckled nervously. Mark said nothing. He simply walked up to the podium reserved for residents and placed his folder on it. His hands didn't tremble, but his heart pounded with the adrenaline of confrontation. "Thank you for letting me speak," he said evenly. "I'm here to address the letters, the fines, and the accusations you've sent me over the past 2 months." Corinne tilted her head. "We're simply enforcing community standards, Mr. Wilson. All homeowners are required." "I'm not a homeowner in your HOA," Mark interrupted, his voice firmer. "I never signed your bylaws. My property is exempt." Gasps fluttered through the room. A man in the back whispered, "Exempt." Corinne's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ah yes, the mythical exemption you've been claiming. You're mistaken. All properties within the Ridgeview Estate's boundaries are." "That's exactly the problem," Mark said. He reached into his folder and produced a color-coded map. "According to the county's original subdivision plat, my parcel was carved out long before the Ridgeview HOA was established. It sits on land previously designated as the McAllister Homestead. No one updated the boundaries when your HOA formed. The county records are clear." He held up the map, letting the audience see. Bright yellow shaded his lot, while the rest of the HOA appeared in pale blue. The line between them was thick and unmistakable. Corinne didn't glance at the map. She stared directly at him. "I'm sure whatever papers you found online look convincing, but the board and our attorney—" Actually, a new voice cut in. "His papers are correct." All eyes turned to the back of the room. A man in a worn brown jacket and heavy work boots stood up. He had a shock of gray hair and a sunburned face, the look of someone who'd spent a lifetime outdoors. Under one arm, he carried a rolled-up surveyor's map in a plastic tube. "I'm Carl Pritchard," he said, walking down the aisle. "Retired county surveyor. I worked on Ridgeview Estate's original zoning applications back in the 90s. This gentleman is right. Lot 14B sits outside your jurisdiction. Always has. Always will." Mark's chest loosened at the sight of him. He'd tracked Carl down through old county directories, and the man had agreed to come, though Mark hadn't been sure until now if he actually would. Corinne's face stiffened. "Mr. Pritchard, while we appreciate your nostalgia, this is a legal matter, not a memory exercise." Carl snorted. "Nostalgia, huh? Lady, I've got the original sealed plats in my truck, not photocopies, originals. Stamped and signed by the county engineer. You're barking up the wrong tree here." Laughter rippled through the room, tentative but growing. A neighbor muttered, "Finally, someone standing up to her." Another whispered, "I knew he wasn't making it up." Corinne slammed her papers down. "Enough. This is a board meeting, not a circus. Mr. Wilson, regardless of your claims, you've created disruption in this community." "I created disruption," Mark's voice sharpened. "You sent threatening letters to a property you don't control. You installed cameras aimed directly at my house. You've harassed me in front of my neighbors. That's illegal." He let that word hang in the air. Illegal. It was a word that carried weight, heavier than fines or bylaws. Corinne's eyes flicked to the board members sitting on either side of her. For the first time, they didn't look entirely comfortable. One, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt, cleared his throat and whispered something to the treasurer. Another leaned back, arms crossed. The cracks in her authority were showing. "Maybe we should consult legal counsel before proceeding," the treasurer said quietly. "No," Corinne snapped louder than she meant. "We are the authority here. We decide." "You don't decide anything about me," Mark said, stepping away from the podium. "If this harassment continues, I'll file a restraining order and pursue damages, and I'll make sure the county hears about your misuse of funds." The room erupted. People began speaking over one another, some defending Mark, others nervously siding with Corinne. One woman stood up, clutching her purse. "I'm sick of these fines too," she said. "My husband built a shed and you tried to charge us $500. Another man raised his hand. "What about the special assessment last year? Where did that money go?" Corinne banged a gavel on the table. "Order, order." But the order wouldn't return. The veneer of control she'd worn like a crown was cracking under the fluorescent lights of the clubhouse. Carl leaned over to Mark and muttered, "You've got her on the ropes." Mark nodded slightly but didn't smile. He wasn't here for revenge, at least not tonight. He just wanted them to stop. Finally, Corinne stood, her voice trembling with anger. "This meeting is adjourned. We will reconvene after consulting our attorney. Mr. Wilson, expect a letter." Mark gathered his papers calmly. "Make sure it's addressed correctly this time." He walked out of the clubhouse to the cool night air, the buzz of whispered conversations following him. He could feel eyes on his back, some hostile, some admiring, all curious. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt a flicker of power return to his hands. At the edge of the parking lot, Carl caught up with him. "You handled that well," the old surveyor said. "She's used to bulldozing people. Not tonight." "Thanks for coming," Mark said. "I wasn't sure if you'd show." Carl chuckled. "Oh, I wouldn't miss this for the world. Just watch yourself. Folks like her don't like losing." Mark glanced back at the glowing windows of the clubhouse, where Corinne stood silhouetted by the light, still clutching her stack of papers like weapons. Even from this distance, he could see the rigid set of her shoulders. She wasn't done. Neither was he. Mark thought the board meeting would be the end of it. He was wrong. 3 weeks later, he came home from work to find an envelope taped to his door again. This one wasn't a threatening HOA letter. It was thicker, legal paper, sealed and stamped by the county courthouse. The words printed across the front made his stomach twist. Wilson v. Ridgeview, Estates Homeowners Association. Plaintiff, Ridgeview HOA, Karen D. Holt, President. Mark tore it open with trembling hands. His eyes darted over the first lines, each word heavier than the last. Defendant, residing at 14B Valley View Lane, has willfully and repeatedly refused to comply with established community standards, thereby lowering neighboring property values and causing material and reputational damage to the Ridgeview Homeowners Association. Mark stared at the words in disbelief. Lowering property values, he muttered aloud. He looked around at his well-kept yard, trimmed hedges, and the cabin-style home he'd maintained with his own hands. He'd done nothing wrong. Nothing. He flipped through the pages, finding bold accusations. Unauthorized exterior paint color. Non-compliant fencing. Refusal to remove prohibited signage, private property sign. Harassment of HOA officials. His jaw clenched. Harassment, he whispered. The only one harassing anyone was her. The last page made his pulse spike. The plaintiff seeks damages totaling $75,000 and an injunction mandating compliance with HOA guidelines. Mark dropped the papers onto his kitchen counter. His hands were shaking now, the rage pushing through the confusion. He took a deep breath and leaned against the counter, trying to steady his thoughts. This wasn't just about fines anymore. Karen wanted to bury him, legally, financially, and publicly. He picked up his phone and called the county clerk's office to verify the filing. The woman on the other end confirmed it. The case was real, officially entered into the docket. Unbelievable, Mark muttered. Within days, word spread through Ridgeview like wildfire. Neighbors whispered on sidewalks, in driveways, and at the cafe near the entrance gate. Some shook their heads in sympathy when Mark passed. Others avoided eye contact altogether. And then came the kicker. A local reporter showed up at his gate. "Mr. Wilson," she said, holding a microphone. "Channel 12 News. We're covering a developing story about a civil suit filed by the Ridgeview HOA. Do you have any comment about the allegations?" Mark stood on his porch, jaw tight. "Only that the HOA doesn't own me or my land, and soon everyone will know that." The clip aired that night, framed with dramatic music and slow pans of the neighborhood. The anchor called it a property dispute turning ugly. Karen appeared on screen, smiling tightly, surrounded by her loyal board members. "This isn't personal," she said into the microphone. "We just want to maintain the integrity of our community. Everyone must follow the same rules." Mark almost laughed. Not personal, she turned a zoning technicality into a witch hunt. That night he knew he needed help. Not just any lawyer, someone who understood HOA law like a surgeon understood anatomy. After a few phone calls and some old contacts from his contracting business, he got a name that came up more than once: Bert Jensen. "Old school guy," one friend said. "Gray suit, yellow tie, drives a '98 Buick, but he's a bulldog in court. Knows HOA codes like scripture." Mark called him the next morning. "Jensen Law Office," a gravelly voice answered. "Mr. Jensen, my name's Mark Wilson. I'm being sued by the Ridgeview HOA." There was a pause. "Let me guess," Bert said. "You don't actually live in the HOA, do you?" Mark blinked. "How did you?" "Son, I've seen this movie before. You'd be amazed how many of these little neighborhood kingdoms overreach. Come by my office tomorrow at 9. Bring everything, deed, plat, maps, letters, the whole mess." The next morning, Mark drove to Bert's office downtown. The place looked like it hadn't changed since the '80s. Wood-paneled walls, dusty law books stacked on shelves, and a coffee pot that looked older than Mark. Bert himself sat behind a heavy oak desk. His tie was crooked, his glasses perched low on his nose, and a legal pad sat in front of him filled with scribbles. Let's see what the Queen of Ridgeview cooked up, Bert said, flipping through Mark's documents. He frowned, then chuckled. Oh, this is rich. They're suing you for noncompliance with bylaws that don't legally apply to your parcel. He flipped to another page. And claiming property value damages without evidence. They don't have an appraiser's report, just some handwritten nonsense. Mark leaned forward. Can they win? Bert looked up, his eyes twinkling. They can file anything they want. Winning, another story. But here's what's interesting, she's made it personal. Once it's personal, she's sloppy. That's where we'll win. Bert spent hours reviewing every detail. He took notes, muttered to himself, and occasionally smirked at the absurdity of the claims. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. All right, he said. Here's the plan. We counterclaim for harassment and defamation. You've got the evidence, letters, camera, photos, all that. We'll request discovery. Once we get her emails and board meeting notes, I bet we'll find enough to bury their argument 6 feet deep. Mark exhaled slowly. For the first time in weeks, he felt like someone was on his side. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Bert said, standing. These HOA types fight dirty, but they hate sunlight. We're about to shine a big all-flashlight on their mess. The first court hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. The local courthouse buzzed with reporters and curious residents. Karen arrived in a white suit, flanked by 2 board members and her lawyer, a young, smug attorney who looked like he'd never seen a courtroom outside of TV. Cameras flashed as she walked up the steps, smiling like a politician. Mark and Bert arrived quietly. No entourage, no spectacle. Bert's old Buick coughed into the parking lot, and Mark carried a single folder of documents. Inside the courtroom, the judge, a silver-haired woman with an expression that could silence thunder, called the session to order. Karen's attorney stood and began his speech, full of lofty words about community integrity and shared standards. He painted Mark as a rogue homeowner undermining the fabric of harmony in Ridgeview. Mark sat still, jaw clenched, while the lawyer droned on. Bert didn't take a single note. He just waited, eyes half-lidded, like a fisherman letting the bait drift before the hook. Finally, the judge turned to Bert. Mr. Jensen, your response. Bert rose slowly, adjusting his glasses. Your Honor, the Ridgeview Homeowners Association is suing my client for violating bylaws that don't apply to his property. We have county records proving his parcel was never annexed into the HOA. I'd like to enter those into evidence. He handed over the documents, the same ones Mark had shown at the meeting, now neatly tabbed and certified by the county registrar. Karen's lawyer blinked. Your Honor, those records must be outdated. They're certified as of last week, Bert interrupted smoothly. I got them myself. Furthermore, we have photographic evidence of HOA-installed surveillance cameras pointed directly at my client's private residence, along with threatening correspondence. We'll be filing a counterclaim for harassment and emotional distress. A murmur swept through the courtroom. The judge raised a brow. You have evidence of surveillance. Yes, Your Honor. Bert held up printed photos, time-stamped, showing cameras mounted on the HOA's light poles facing Mark's property line. The judge leaned back in her chair, unimpressed by Karen's theatrics. I'm ordering an evidentiary hearing, she said. Both parties will submit documentation of property boundaries and HOA jurisdiction by the next court date. Until then, no further action or fines may be imposed on Mr. Wilson. Karen's face blanched. Her lawyer stammered. Bert just smiled faintly. Thank you, Your Honor. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. Karen hurried past them, refusing to comment, but Mark paused at the top of the steps, Bert beside him. Mr. Wilson, how do you feel about today's ruling? A reporter asked. Mark looked directly into the camera. I feel like people should check their facts before they try to control their neighbors. The clip went viral online. Comments poured in. HOA gone too far again. Finally someone fighting back. Team Mark. Karen's name became a meme in local, Karen of Ridgeview. But beneath the laughter and online buzz, Mark knew something darker was brewing. Karen wasn't the type to back down. If anything, humiliation only fueled her fury. That night while Mark sat on his porch, sipping a beer under the quiet sky, he noticed something strange. One of the HOA security vehicles parked down the road, lights off, engine idling. He watched it for a long time. Then he smiled grimly. "This isn't over," he whispered. And he was right. Karen wasn't finished. The war had only just begun. Bert and Mark uncover that Karen's HOA was improperly filed years ago. The original charter expired, and she's been collecting illegal dues ever since. In court, Karen arrives confident, surrounded by board members, but Bert presents the expired incorporation papers and tax fraud records. The judge's tone shifts instantly. The judge declares the HOA null and void. Karen's control over hundreds of homes collapses. Mark watches the courtroom explode in chaos. Neighbors turn on Karen. Lawsuits fly back at her. The news runs headlines about the HOA that never legally existed. Mark becomes an unlikely local hero. Months later, the neighborhood breathes free again. No fines, no harassment, no Karen. Mark sits on his porch as kids play outside, the silence of freedom filling the valley once ruled by fear.